further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Lynn Pickering.
Thanks very much, Aaron. And thanks to the Prince Edward County Public Library for continuing the Women Killing It Crime Writers Festival. Today, we had hoped to be joined by Alice Walsh, author of the mystery Death on Darby's Island. But Alice lives on Prince Edward Island. And as you know, last night and this morning, Hurricane Fiona made landfall there and has knocked out power to tens of thousands of homes, including Alice's. However, she is safe, and we will be in touch with her to reschedule an interview. In the meantime, I'm happy to introduce two women who are killing it in the mystery genre. Joining us from Vancouver is S.C. Lalli, the author of Are You Sarah? She writes romance and women's fiction novels under her full name, Sonia Lalli, most recently, A Holly Jolly Diwali with Berkeley Romance. Sonia has worked as a lawyer, legal journalist, and in book publishing. Are You Sarah is her first thriller. Welcome, Sonia.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Also joining us today, all the way from Florida, is Lisa Unger. Lisa is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of 20 novels, including Last Girl Ghosted and Confessions on the 745, now in development at Netflix, starring Jessica Alba. With books published in 32 languages and millions of copies sold worldwide, she's regarded as a master of suspense. And today, we're discussing her latest thriller, Secluded Cabin, Sleep 6. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me.
And as Aaron explained, we do have an audience watching today, and they are invited to send a question for the authors. But I'm going to start by asking you both, why the mystery genre? And I'm going to begin with you, Lisa, because you've written several best-selling mysteries. Why the mystery genre?
Well, I don't feel like I picked mystery as much as mystery sort of picked me. I've been a writer all my life, and I don't remember a time before I defined myself that way. But before that, I was a reader, of course, and my mom was a librarian, and she was always a great lover of mystery and thriller, and as well as just a great lover of story in general. From film to television to theater to books. And so I kind of got that love of story from my mom. And my dad, on the other hand, was an engineer, and he wasn't like such a big reader of fiction, and he didn't like the theater, and he didn't like movies. So my mom was always taking me to sort of all of these like wildly inappropriate like films and stuff. And I was like just a kid, and even now she's like, well, I thought it was, going over your head, but of course it wasn't, or not all of it. And so it kind of really formed me as a lover of story. And then, as I sort of got older, I always had this really kind of dark and like twisted imagination. I was always like really curious about things that like nobody really wanted to talk to a kid about, especially a girl. And so now, like as a writer of psychological suspense and crime fiction, I kind of see myself as a spelunker, like I'm just kind of shimmying into those dark spaces to answer the questions that I have about the human psyche. And that type of curiosity and that kind of voracious sort of want to understand human nature and what makes people who they are, what makes people do the things that they do, that kind of, lends itself to crime fiction. It's like, that's the place where, from my perspective, you can really explore human nature most fully. And so I think that it's not so much that I chose to write mystery thrillers, even though, I always did love those types of books, as well as many other different types of books as I was growing up. I feel like it just kind of chose me, and it's just, I've never really wanted to write anything else.
And Sonia, as I said in the intro, Are You Sarah is your first mystery, and it's already on the bestseller list, so congratulations for that. Why did you decide to try your hand at mystery writing?
Well, writing in general, like Lisa, I was always a writer, but for me, I was a young person, I was always drawn to sort of the stories of women, like the complicated, the relationships, the nuances, sort of, what we go through and the expectations on us. And I channeled this mostly into romance, into women's fiction, and which particularly South Asian women and living in the diaspora. And so when I started writing mystery was when I actually had an idea for a thriller. I was in Toronto at the time, and I was waiting outside of a restaurant for an Uber, and I saw a woman across the street waiting for an Uber, and our cars arrived at the same time, and it was the exact same car. And I found myself wondering, like, what would have happened if we switched places? And so it was only once I got an idea for a thriller that I actually sort of ventured out. But like Lisa, I think it was also always there, because I also had a parent who took me to inappropriate movies as a child. My dad is really into like action movies, and I was watching James Bond from the uterus. Like I was always surrounded by sort of blood and gore and intrigue and that sort of excitement. And so once I started writing Are You Sarah, it just kind of felt natural, and I just felt this whole other creative side of me totally awaken that I didn't really know was there, to be honest.
Well, you published this book under your initials, SC Lalli, rather than Sonia, which your other books are published under. Why did you change that?
Well, the publisher of my other books, we'd kind of had a conversation about how they supported it, but we were going to try and keep this separate. And it also was fun to have a little bit of an alter ego, because when I write romance and women's fiction, I'm definitely like my optimistic, happy self. Everything turns out relatively okay. And for a thriller, especially for the ending of Are You Sarah, it's like that's sort of my pessimistic, we're living in the times of 2022, darker side of myself. So it felt good to have an alter ego there.
Well, this is the Women Killing It Crime Writers Festival. Why do you think women are killing it in this genre, Sonia?
I think it's a lot of reasons. I mean, just for me, like my personal view, I'm always typically drawn to women writers, especially, because so often they get to the crux of how I'm feeling, to the ability to, make, all sorts of relationships and situations just so universal and feel so real. I also think that I think there's a lot of support, and maybe Lisa I'd be curious to hear her thoughts on this, because I mean, for me, when I've sent out a book or my editor has asked for endorsements or to do things with other women writers, more often than not, there are women supporting me. And I, in turn, am trying to do that with like mentorships and helping emerging writers and stuff. And so I just feel like for me personally, there's a lot of support, women helping other women also kill it, perhaps.
Yeah. And Lisa, do you have an opinion on why women are so good at writing mysteries?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Sonia in that I think that, women are really good at lifting each other up, especially in the mystery thriller genre. Like we're, it's a little bit of a dichotomy that, the people that are writing the darkest stuff are usually the most friendly, the most supportive. It's such a warm and like bolstering community. And I think that, it's true for, across the board for men and women, but, women especially, I think these days are, sort of working harder to lift each other up. But I also think that, women are kind of on the, we're kind of on the front lines of humanity. We're moms, we're sisters, we're wives, we're seeing, we have these very intense relationships with each other. We're sort of very clear-eyed about the emotional layer to life that I think plays such an important part in crime fiction. Like you can have all the sort of action-packed stuff and the big plots and all of that, and certainly those do very well. But I think that when women turn their attention to crime fiction, they turn their attention to the layers of what makes people who they are, how our connections to each other make us vulnerable, make us stronger, maybe motivate us to do things that we wouldn't imagine in the event that we have to support our family or protect our family, whatever that winds up being. And I think that's really such a big part of women writing crime fiction. And we really dig in deep, we really digging deep to those relationships and how they unfold and what it means to, sort of, kind of get to those layers in the context of crime fiction. So I think it brings it like a much richer perspective, or just a different perspective to crime fiction than what you might think of as like kind of a typically male way of looking at it.
Now, I'm always interested in how authors actually get started writing. And for your career, Lisa, how did you start? What was your first, you got a dog there?
Sorry, he's he's good. Yeah. He's fine.
He's welcome to join us.
I wish he would. He'd be a lot calmer if he did, but he's just making himself known. All well, sorry.
That's fine. He can join anytime. As I was saying, I want to know how you started sort of on the beginning. I mean, kids have to write essays and so on in school, but most people don't continue writing and certainly go on to be a best-selling author. How did you get started?
Well, as I said earlier, I've always been a writer. I don't ever remember not telling stories, not writing stories, writing plays, writing like really bad poetry, essays, all that stuff, all the different ways that we experiment with writing. And, I think my mom on some level knew that I was going to be a writer, but my dad was an engineer. And when I sort of expressed to him that maybe I would like to be a writer, his answer to that was like, no, that's not, people don't do that. They don't do that for a living. It's not what we, it's not how you move through life. So I kind of believed him, and so when I graduated from college, even though I had started my first novel when I was 19 years old and my entire education was basically focused on, writing and literature, I, didn't really have the confidence to pursue that as I left university. So I did the next best thing was, which was I went into publishing. And so I spent 10 years in publishing as a book publicist. And it was kind of during that time that I realized, people really actually are doing this for a living. And, maybe I can do it too. So unfortunately, I was a book publicist. So I was really good at my job. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the time I spent writing got smaller and smaller until I wound up, in a place in my life where I wasn't really writing at all. And so I had a moment in my life, an epiphany, where I realized that kind of everything I was doing was wrong. I was like with the wrong guy. I was in a job that that I was giving 110% of myself, but I didn't truly love. And that I was going to have to look back on myself 5 years, 10 years down the road and go, you know what, you never even tried. You never even tried to do it. And so from that point, I got very serious about my writing, and I started doing the only thing you really need to do to be a writer, and that's to actually write every day. And so that's what I did. And from that point, I finished the book that I started when I was 19. It took me about a year and a half from that moment to finish. And when I did, I kind of, didn't really know what to do with the book, but even though I had been in publishing, I was kind of like on the other side of publishing, but I was happy that I had finished it, because I know that a lot of people think they want to write a first novel or a novel, and a lot of people plan to do that, and not everybody does actually finish that book. So I was very happy to have done that. And then, I still wasn't totally sure what to do. Wound up going on vacation to a place down here in Florida called Key West. And while I was down there, I went to a bar called Sloppy Joe's, where I met my husband. And it was kind of this like love at first sight, Shazam moment. And, within 6 months, he had proposed. We had both quit our big corporate jobs. I sold my apartment that I owned in Brooklyn Heights, and I gave myself 1 year to sell the book that I had written and to write another one. So I basically just kind of went for broke. As you can imagine, my father, the engineer, was not happy about any of these decisions at all. But I did get signed on pretty quickly by one of my first choice agents, and she brokered a 2-book deal with St. Martin's Press, like a very small advance, like a don't quit your day job, like nickel and a cheese sandwich size advance. But, it didn't matter to me at that time, because it was just like, the only dream I had ever had of my life. So I was, kind of over the moon about that. And I knew that, that first publishing contract is not always a windfall. what it is like a doorway, a doorway that you can walk through into the writing life. And I did that. My first book came out in 2002, and my 20th novel will publish, Secluded Cabin Sleep 6 will publish this November.
Right. Now, I want to go back a bit because you said your mother was encouraging, your dad wasn't, and
Right.
of course your husband was.
Yeah.
But did you have any mentors or teachers or anybody that sort of really inspired you to write?
Yes, absolutely. I had an early English teacher. I had actually two really powerful English teachers in middle school and high school. Mrs. Nehemiah was my my high school English teacher, and Mrs. Galligani was my Mrs. Nehemiah was my middle school English teacher, and Mrs. Galligani was my high school teacher, and they both recognized the writer in me and gave me the early praise and direction, to pursue that goal. They were the first people to say, you're a writer, you have a talent. And then, they encouraged me to enter a writing contest when I was still in middle school. And I won that essay writing contest. And I remember when I won that award, I remember having that be the first moment where I was like, okay, yeah, maybe I am this, maybe I can do that. Like, that was my first big yes. And then of course, my mom was a librarian, and, she always knew, I think on some level, what my abilities were and how they would direct me. And so I did have a lot of early support from teachers and from my mom.
I want to go back to your path to publishing because I think you made it sound kind of easy. It was, and I know that it's so difficult for so many people to get a publisher.
Yes.
Did you submit your book to a lot of publishers, or because you'd worked in the publishing industry, you knew people who could help you?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, like, my time in publishing, did not help me get published. In fact, like, my publisher that I worked for many years declined to publish my first manuscript. So which at the time I was kind of a little bit upset about it, but later on I realized that it's probably a good thing because, I think there's always like this kind of sense that people want to say, oh, you got published because you were in publishing, but it's really not. Nobody does you any favors in this business. As we learn as we go. So I was happy to wind up at a different publisher than the one I worked at. But, I think for me, the advantages that I had in the early part of my, quest to get published was that I knew what kind of agent I wanted, which is like, I think the first big thing that you have to really think about when you start writing, or when you start to get the idea that you might be seeking publishing, because I wanted an agent who was powerful, that had big clients, but that still maintained a small boutique agency. And I wanted that because I knew what it was like to get, I'd seen people get signed on by some of the bigger entertainment agencies, and you're just this teeny fish in this really big pond. And so I wanted someplace where I could be like a small fish, in a small a smaller pond. So I was very dedicated to that. And I knew, I had an idea sort of what I wanted, and Elaine Markson was my top choice agent, and she did pretty quickly sign me on. It was only a matter of a couple of months of seeking an agent before she called me and signed me on, and she was my agent for the next 13 years until she became ill and sadly passed away about 5 years ago. But then she took the book out, and certainly there were rejections, and it was St. Martin's Press that then did, sign on the novel, my first one, and the one I had not yet written. And that was a really important thing to me as well for my first contract, that it was for my book that I had written and the one I hadn't written yet. Because I knew that was like the only way to get, like, you wanted to have that commitment from your publisher that if you have a one book, that you have that you can write the next one too for them. And so I had those advantages. It certainly wasn't easy, but at the same time, I've been like sort of working on that novel for 10 years. So I had, and I've been working in publishing for all that time as well. So I felt like, I kind of, paid my dues in different ways, but it was in that sense, it was a fairly, a less rocky road to publication than many have to deal with.
Well, Sonia, Lalli, I want to bring you back in because I have the same question for you. How did you get started writing? What was your first writing you did? Was it as a child?
Yeah, I mean, like Lisa, I think like a lot of avid readers, I always was a big reader. I wrote creatively. I don't even remember. It's on a hard drive somewhere. Attempts at various books that nothing to do with my life, nothing to do with my situation, just sort of a creative flex. I think the first time that I seriously tried writing a book with the ambition to sell it was in my mid-20s. And that was my first rom-com. I was kind of at that point in my life where there was some pressure for girls who were done college to get married and those kinds of things. And I was like sort of rebelling about those expectations. So basically my path was that I went to law school first and have worked in legal or quasi-legal jobs ever since. I think, my parents always really supported my ambition supported my hobby in writing, the idea that I could make it perhaps one day. But there's also this feeling like, the arts aren't always stable. It's unpredictable. Even now I'm living my dream, able to write books right now, but what is it going to be like in a year from now or 5 years from now? So there is that sense of unpredictability. So they always encouraged me to go for something more secure. So that's kind of why I went to law, and I really did enjoy it. But I sort of had this pull in my mid-20s that this is my chance now to really try. So I worked in a quasi-legal job. It was more 9 to 5, less demanding than a sort of very 80-hour work week that some of my friends were working, kind of thing. And it sort of afforded me the time to really focus on my writing. And so over the course of, I think it was a year and a half or 2 years, I was writing, I was working, I was submitting, I was getting lots and lots of rejections. Ultimately, I was able to find my first agent. She was quite junior as an agent. And lucky for me was that she had a lot of time to work on me developmentally, and not all agents do have that time. So I actually worked on the book with her for 6 months before she even signed me. And then it was another year before she sold that. So it was a sort of a different process, but I think because I was very, very raw and I hadn't really focused on my writing at all while I was in law school, there was a lot of work to be done. So I was really lucky to have that sort of someone who could devote so much time to me. Now I have a different agent. It sort of didn't work out with that one. She's really great. She's in Toronto, she's Canadian, and I really love her. And so I've been able to continue on with that.
Now, did you have any mentors or teachers that inspired you or encouraged you?
I had some great high school English teachers as well. I also had a creative writing tutor. So I took a creative writing course, and I'd given her something that I'd written. This was sort of a manuscript that I'd had that I don't know what to call it. I guess it was an attempt at literary fiction. I really didn't know where my voice was and I loved reading, but I didn't really think about what I was reading and why it made a difference or how the genre worked or anything like that. So she was reading this and she's like, yeah, it's fine, but I don't really see you in this. I can't remember the exact conversation. I'm paraphrasing. But basically what I'd done is I'd written this sort of very, very ambiguous story, and it was a very, very ambiguous character. And there was nothing really about her. There was nothing about her family. There was nothing about her race, her background, like who she was. And I think I was just kind of trying to remove myself from my writing because I thought that's what I should do. And then she's like, no, you should write about you. And so that's when I was like, oh, actually, this is way easier. I'm just going to write about all the things that I feel that I'm going through and that my friends are going through and like my mother has gone through and those kinds of things. So she really helped me sort of get over whatever hang up I didn't really know that I had, and just write what you like, just write what you know. So that was really helpful.
And you said you had a lot of rejections. How did you handle that rejection?
I think I mean, it gets easier every rejection. I think I've heard recently that some people say you need to just collect rejections, like go for a goal of 100 rejections a year or something, because eventually you're going to get one that isn't. I think for me, it was just staying busy and staying motivated. I think for me, like having a career that was outside of writing was really, really grounding for me. And having friends who were not writers, my husband, who is quasi-publishing as well, but is not a writer. For me, I think having just so like my whole world and my whole mental space didn't get taken up with this, because yes, it is a huge part of our life, and it is a big part of my identity. But I think it's a little bit dangerous to have that be my whole identity, because when you do get a rejection, you feel like a failure. And it doesn't mean like you're a failure. Everybody gets rejections. Even Lisa Unger got rejection. So like that's very encouraging to everybody, I'm sure. So.
Rejection is part of it, from, actually for your entire career, there's no shortage of, rejections. And I think that, at a certain point, you just kind of, there's really nothing that you control except what you do at the keyboard. So even, if you're an aspiring, or you're just starting out in your career, or you're far down the road, your responsibility is to just focus on, what you're doing on the page every day, and try to, focus a little bit less on what's happening, in the greater outer world.
But it also sounds to me, and you could both address this, that you have to have quite a bit of self-confidence in your work in order to take that rejection.
I wonder if it's, I that word confidence is, yes, I guess you do have to have a certain level of confidence to do anything. If you don't have confidence, you might not even be able to like get out of bed in the morning, I think. But, for me, it was always just kind of more than a confidence, it was just always kind of a knowledge, right? That this is who I am. This is what I do. I know that when I get up in the morning and I go to my keyboard, I'm bringing, the best of myself to the page, and that, I bring a lot of dedication and all my best work to every novel. And I can't do more than that. If you're tied to outcome, if you're tied to how the work will be received once it leaves your desk, then you're always like a little bit off kilter. I always sort of liken it to, to kayaking. It's like you're kayaking in really big waters. There's all kinds of events and things that'll take place. There are these crushing highs and these dizzying highs and these kind of crushing lows. And all you can do is just, keep paddling.
Well, I want to continue on that vein, Lisa, because you have been such a successful author for 20 years. And I think it's really helpful to other authors. What about reviews? Did you get bad reviews for your books, and how?
Never.
Well, because I'm thinking, the rejection, and then you get your book published, and maybe you get a bad review.
Yeah, of course I think it's part of the process of writing. If you're writing authentically, right? If you're writing the books that you want to write, and you're, really when you write your novel, you're really putting yourself out there in a major way. You spend a year alone with the work, and then, you turn it over to your publisher, and it goes out into the world. And, it's like anything else, right? If you walked out into the street, if you had 5 conversations, 4 people are going to like you, and 1 person is not going to like you. And you're maybe not always 100% in control of why that might be. You might remind them of somebody they don't like. They might not like the clothes that you're wearing, the color of your hair, right? But you can't control whether that 5th person likes you or doesn't like you. It's just, there's a lot more people when you publish, and there's a lot more people who have an opportunity to like you or to dislike you. And some of them, when they dislike you, they write about it, in very public ways. And no, it's never a good day when somebody doesn't like your work. It's never a good day when somebody says something mean about something you've done. I guess in some senses it probably hurts every time. But ultimately you just have to go back to the keyboard and keep writing, because that's the only answer to any of this. You just keep going back and doing your best, and you're lucky if you're able to put your work out there. And you're actually lucky if somebody thinks enough of you that they see, you know, they go to print to tell you how much they don't like your work.
Well, we have a question from a viewer, Sharon. Sharon writes, should you self-publish after getting lots of rejections or keep trying? Sonia, do you have an opinion on that?
I'm not sure. I'd be curious what Lisa has to say, but I think that, I mean, I might be mistaken, but I don't think that self-publishing necessarily means that you can't also continue writing and you can't also try to seek representation and get a publisher. I mean, you know, like after the first book, then you're writing the next book, then they're writing the next book. So it doesn't, and I do believe there are lots of success stories where authors have had lots of success within their own self-published work, and then they get, you know, a publisher catches wind, and then they get signed to be traditionally published. So I think there's so many ways to navigate that. I wouldn't want to give you the wrong advice, but I don't think self-publishing necessarily means that you're ruling out the other option.
And we do have a very Canadian successful self-publishing story. Terry Follis, who's a best-selling author and has been for several years. His very first book, he self-published, and he entered it in the Stephen Leacock humor writing contest. He won. So they accepted self-published books for the award. He won. And because he won, he got a contract with a publisher and now has published several best-selling books. So Lisa, do you have an opinion about self-publishing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many different paths to, you know, to where you want to go. I just wonder, you know, you might want to sit down and do some soul searching about what your goal is, you know, as a writer. You know, if you just have a story that you wanted to tell, say maybe for your family, and you sought to self-publish that, that's one way to go. If you're looking to be a traditionally published author, you know, unfortunately, you have to run the gauntlet that everybody else has to run to get to that space. But, you know, the industry is always changing. And certainly there are many, many success stories of people who self-publish and then go on to become traditionally published. It's just that the only thing I always caution about when talking about this is that, you know, there are a lot of companies out there that are like kind of set up to prey on aspiring writers, and you wind up paying those companies a lot of money to publish your book. And you may think that it's the same route as traditional publishing, but the fact is that they never get the distribution that in some cases that, you know, a traditional publisher will get, meaning that your books won't be in the places where you think they'll be. And so if you want to take the self-publishing road, you might consider that you're taking the road of entrepreneurship for your book, which may not be the worst thing in the world. But if you're looking to, if you really just want to be a traditionally published author and you're looking at that as a way to get there, you know, I always talk to aspiring writers and say that the most important thing is that you try every day to be a better writer than you were yesterday, and that you focus on making sure that your work and your manuscript is the best that it can be. And you do that with teachers and editors and writing groups and all of that. Focus on becoming a better writer, and that may be another way that brings you closer to publishing. So the actual act of trying to get published should be incidental to your work of being a better writer. Okay.
Well, thank you, Lisa and Sonia. Let's talk about your books now. Sonia, we're going to start with you. Your first mystery, Are You Sarah, is on the bestseller list, as I said earlier, and this is a teaser line. 2 women, each named Sarah, get into separate ride shares, but only one makes it home alive. Which Sarah was the real target? Now, you did tell us a little earlier your inspiration for Are You Sarah? What more would you like listeners to know about the story?
I guess I'd want you to know that the sort of premise, this rideshare mix-up, who was actually meant to be murdered, is really just the tip of the iceberg for the story. It was sort of this, you know, half-baked idea I came up with in the back of an Uber, and then I wrote it down and didn't look at it again for a year. But, you know, once I had that sort of premise and I kept going back to it thinking, oh, what is the story here? Who are these women? Like, why don't we know which one was supposed to die? Like, and so that's when I really brought in all these other sort of ideas and characters that I'd had over the years and how it could work in the story. And it's really about these two women named Sarah and how they are both trying to break free of the expectations on them. They're totally different. One, Sarah, is, you know, she's 20, she's privileged, she's beautiful. She has, she's also like very damaged, and she's made a lot of really, really bad choices, and she's very hurt by her family. Unfortunately, this is the Sarah that dies in the first chapter. And then there's the other Sarah, who is a good Indian girl, although she's actually anything but. And she is the child of, you know, hardworking, poor immigrant parents. She's always perceived to do the right thing. She's in law school, she's making something of herself. But actually, she's had to do all these things and make all these choices that are not condoned by society, that she's had to hide from everybody. And so she believes someone is after her, and that you know, she was the one who was meant to be killed. So just getting to sort of go through these, you know, although like it was the plot, I think, that catches people in this premise, it's really, I hope, these very, very complicated women that I hope sort of keeps people reading.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, now your latest book, Secluded Cabin Sleep 6, I mean, even the title sounds scary. How about describing the plot and the characters?
Okay, so Secluded Cabin Sleep 6, which is my 20th novel and releases this coming November, is about a brother and sister, Hannah and Mako, their spouses, a family friend named Cricket and her mysterious new boyfriend, and they're all headed out to a luxury vacation rental in the woods for some much needed R&R and a disconnect from their very busy modern lives. And they're all hauling with them tons of baggage in the form of secrets and lies and complicated long-time relationships. And outside the house, a stranger is lurking. And this stranger has a dark agenda. Of course, there's a storm brewing, a big one, and cell phone service is spotty. And as the first evening in this house progresses in a very creepy fashion, one of the friends goes missing. And that's the premise for Secluded Cabin Sleep 6. And again, you know, like Lalli said, you know, the premise is always, you know, that's the moment, right? That's the hook, that's the idea. But, you know, what really kept me and what always keeps me, you know, fascinated as an author discovering characters is, you know, these people that populate the novel and all their layers and all the different ways they relate to each other and what makes them who they are. And I think that's, you know, of course, character is king, right? I mean, for the reader and for the writer, they can love your story, but if they don't love your characters, they're not coming along for the ride.
Now, most authors I've interviewed don't like it when I ask, where do you get your ideas? But I always ask it anyway. And Sonia has told us where the idea came from for Are You Sarah? And I read in your acknowledgements, you write that research was a big part of writing the novel, that you spent time in rental accommodation during the pandemic, and that's where you got the idea. So are you on vacation and your mind is still working? Oh, this would be a great idea.
100%. I cannot go on vacation like a normal person. It's just literally not possible. There was actually a couple of things that fed into this. For, you know, usually for me, there's usually a germ, something that gets me really obsessed about a certain topic, and I spend a lot of time researching that. In this case, in addition to the rental cabins, I was also really fascinated at the time that I started writing with the idea of DNA, the 23andMe, like sort of at-home DNA testing kits. And I'm completely paranoid and a total conspiracy theorist. So it fascinates me how people think that they can just like spit in a swab and send off their DNA and like have no thought whatsoever how it's going to be used against them at some point in the future. So that was really bothering me at the time. So I started doing a lot of research into that. And then during the pandemic, my family and I, my husband and my daughter, and our dog, we all went up to these rental cabins deep in the woods in Georgia, and they were beautiful. They were like gorgeously appointed, and that part of northern Georgia is stunningly beautiful, like close to the Appalachian Trail, lots of hiking, and the places were great. But I just could not get past the fact that we were like completely isolated out in the woods. And then I just kept thinking about things like the door codes, like the code that we used to get into the house. Like, did everybody have the same code, or did it get changed every time? And then this kind of strange caretaker guy kept like driving by in his gator, and he was like, oh, I would get in the house sometimes for the owners. And I'm just like, you do? That's weird. And so like all these things, like I can never stop that imagination from like spinning out the darkest possible scenarios. And then, also during pandemic time, we wound up meeting my parents, who are in Pennsylvania. We're in Florida, and we decided like we just couldn't like not see each other for any longer. So we decided to kind of drive from opposite directions and meet at yet another isolated rental cabin, this time, in Asheville, in the Asheville area. And so it was like the whole piece about like traveling with your extended family, like being on vacation with your mom and your niece and nephew and your brother and all that, like, and how that's like not really a vacation at all usually. And all the family drama. So all of these pieces kind of interlock together to create Secluded Cabin Sleep Sex. I mean, like, this is the place where in my fiction, this is where I metabolize all the things that that frighten and bother me, and all the questions that I have about people. And usually that question is, what is wrong with you?
well, you mentioned the characters in the book and your own family, and I'm wondering, do you consciously, or maybe even subconsciously, base characters on people Do sometimes they recognize themselves in the book?
No, never.
I don't think you're being honest with me, Lisa.
How could you say such a thing? Well, I think that I think that, there's never anything based on any one person, because for me, every character is like some amalgamation of my imagination, my observations, people that I know, conversations that I've overheard, things that I wonder about people, and there actually over the years have been people who saw themselves in my book, and they were not too happy. They were not too happy about it. And, and I always think to myself, how arrogant, to think that you are in my book. Don't you know that it's all about me? So it's kind of like, everything in fiction is autobiographical and nothing is, so it's a little bit of yes and a little bit of no.
Okay. And Sonia, how about you? Any of your characters based on your friends or your family, and do they recognize themselves?
I definitely borrow a lot of, I think I take little pieces of different people and different situations and sort of mix it up in a totally unrecognizable way. Sometimes I don't really realize I'm doing it until later, or until I'm editing and thinking, oh, I should really give my friend a heads up that I put this in here because that happened to her in 2005 and she's going to read this. So, I mean, it's not really intentional. It just sort of, it's by osmosis. I experience life, and a lot of that ends up somehow on the page. So yes, I do base it on people, but I don't mean to.
Confession. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, anybody who has ever taken a writing course knows that the first line or first paragraph has to grab the reader's attention. I'd like to ask each of you to read from the first page of your novel. Is that okay, Sonia?
Sure, I can read the first line.
We'll start with you.
I have the first line memorized because it's very short. It's there's a dead girl in the bathroom. That's the first line to my book.
So that certainly is a grabber. That grabs your attention. Lisa, how about you reading?
Yes, let's see. I'm just opening it up right now. The first line of my book, in the prologue is, it's Christmas night, 2017. And the first sentence is, the carcass is splayed in the middle of the table, which I did not realize was the first line. As far as first lines go, that's pretty good.
I did notice, reading further than the first line of your book, Lisa, that you're already sensing family tensions.
Yes.
I mean, just in the first 2 pages.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, this is something that, is a theme that kind of runs through a lot of my books, is like, the difference between what is on the surface and what is happening underneath, especially as far as family dynamics. I always think that there's, especially in the US, like there's this like idea, this like image of like the perfect family that's like put out there. And you have these images of like the holidays where everyone gathers around the table, like in love and communion and supporting each other. And it's like this joyful event. And I don't know about you, but I've never been to one of those. I've never been to one of those idyllic family dinners. So, and I suspect that not many people have. So I'm always really interested in that, the tensions and the complicated relationships and, how things evolve over a period of decades and generations to reveal the truth about, family dynamics, which, could always, there may be love there, but there's usually a lot of other layers too.
Yes, and I think that's one of the things about your book and your books is that people can relate to a lot of the characters in some way or another.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
because I think that's really the most important thing, that we can, that our characters, like there's, maybe an idea that, your character has to be perfect, or, like if you're writing mystery thriller, or there's like a hero and a villain. But I think in life, we don't really have that many heroes, and we don't really have that many, pure villains. We're all like sort of a complicated amalgamation of our choices. And I think that, if your characters represent that, and you're honest about their flaws, and they're honest about their flaws, or maybe they're not honest, but your reader can see that, then that the flawed character is far more relatable than the perfect one.
Yeah. And Sonia, your book goes on after that first line that certainly grabs people. In those first 2 pages, and as you say, the 2 Sarahs meet in on the very first page, and then you've said which Sarah dies. So how important is it for you to grab the reader in that way, and yet also you're describing the character of each Sarah and the kind of person they are.
Well, I really like first lines that just jump out at you and think, oh, I'm not going to just skim this. I'm gonna keep going for a bit, and keep going and going. I think for the first chapter generally, it was really important for me to have these 2 Sarahs meet and have this really, really great connection, and to really show their character as much as possible, because one of them does die very, very quickly. And although we in a few chapter flashbacks, we do see that Sarah, we see what she was, we see her mistakes, who her, we meet the potential murderer. We really get to see why she was so sad and why she made some of these choices. But it's really, I think, establishes quickly, like gives people a reason to be invested in these characters and find out, who done it, because just finding out who the murderer is isn't enough. We really have to be invested in who these women were and what the consequences are of what's happening.
You have to care about the characters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, do you write for the reader or do you write for yourself, Sonia?
I write for myself as a reader, I think, because I know what I love, like psychological fiction. I love women's fiction, that books that really get to the heart of relationships and about these like complicated, flawed women. And I think that I don't try and write to a reader thinking like anticipating what they like, because like Lisa was saying earlier, we just don't know what people like. Everyone's different. You know, there's somewhere out there, there's someone who doesn't like the book Gone Girl, for example, right? Like I can't imagine it, but like there are people who don't like it. And so I think that for me, I just know what I like, and I just want to do more of that. And so I think that's what I try and do.
And Lisa, do you write for the reader or you write for yourself?
I don't know that you can make that choice. You know, I always feel like for me, the first draft, which is the first draft for me is a very subconscious process. You know, I write without an outline. I have like kind of a vague idea what the book might be about. But I don't know who's going to show up day to day, what they're going to do. And I certainly don't know how the book is going to end. Like if I did, I couldn't write it because, you know, I write for the same reason that I read. I want to know what's happening or what's going to happen to the characters that are living in my head. But, you know, I never really consider that I'm just writing for myself, you know, because your relationship to your reader, you know, whatever that is, your readers or your ideal reader, or whether your ideal reader is yourself, which I think that's very wise. Like, I think in some ways that's true. We're all readers first, right? That's where we fall in love with story, in the pages of somebody else's book. But I feel like in a lot of ways that first draft is all for me. And then in the second draft, when I go back to page 1 and I start reading, that's when I really, you know, start inviting in the idea of another reader beyond me. Like, did I bring my other reader out, you know, along for this ride? Are the characters as deep as they can be? You know, have I, you know, shown the relationships in a way that, you know, people will connect with it? Is the plot propulsive? You know, like this, so there's an editorial phase that I think is the place where I really invite in fully the idea of the reader or my readers. So I think it's both, in a sense, like both relationships to the page, the one you have as a writer and the one you have as a reader, are critical.
Now, do you have advice for wannabe mystery writers? I'm sure with the success that you've had, you get a lot of wannabe writers asking for your advice.
I mean, the only advice that I can give to any writer is to just write. You know, I think this is the thing that we lose sight of. You know, there's a seminal book on creativity called The Artist Way, and it's by a woman named Julia Cameron. And she also wrote a book called The Right to Write. And in it, she says that we often treat our unpublished writers as if they have an embarrassing case of unrequited love. You know, like they think maybe they're going to marry Tom Cruise or something. And so like that, that's how we treat them. And so it makes, I think, many writers, especially people who have big jobs, families, you know, might not have permission from a spouse to to devote the time to writing. Like, I think that, you know, a lot of writers don't give themselves permission to write. And so they wind up talking about writing or thinking about writing or making up excuses why they didn't write. But, you know, I think that, you know, as much as writing for me is like, and that creative space is partially magic, like there's something about it that even I don't understand. The biggest part of it is the discipline to set a schedule and honor the schedule in a way that you would anything else that's important to you. You would make an appointment to see your friend, or you would make an appointment to see a doctor, and you would honor that appointment because you care about, you know, your friend's time, or you care about your health. And you would honor those appointments, but often the appointments that we make with ourselves, we don't honor. And if you have that desire to write, then it's a real thing. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get published. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a huge bestseller. It doesn't necessarily mean any of that, but you'll never know what it means unless you spend the time doing it. And, you know, you sit down with your, you know, when you set your time to do it, you honor the schedule and you write when you say you're going to write. That's the most important advice I can give to any writer of any genre.
And Sonia, what about you?
Yeah, 100% what Lisa said. I mean, there was one time very, very early on when I think I had like 3 or 4 whole hours after work, nothing to do. And I was like, okay, I can write. And then I spent the whole time on looking at the writers and artists handbook, looking through agent profiles. And I was like, I haven't even written a book yet, you know? And it's like, why am and I was so mad at myself for wasting 4 precious hours of no obligation on thinking about something that is really only an hour. Sorry, someone's knocking at my door. That's okay. Is really only like it's a future point. Like I'm going to get here, but I'm not going to get here if I don't write. So I after that I really sort of focused and never let myself look at that writers and artists yearbook until I needed it. The other piece of recommendation, I'm sorry for the knocking. I think my neighbor
that's okay. I can
hear it. A good time to start. Okay. Is to read a lot and to use your time to read, to sort of obviously enjoy the love of reading and read books that you're writing in, the genre you're writing in, read books that you like totally different that inspire you. But something that I do is like when you read, you can also read critically, like think critically about what you're enjoying about the book. You know, what did you like that the author is doing? What didn't you like? How do they move through passage of time? How do they deal with this issue you're struggling with in your own writing, and see how others do it? Because I find that if I'm ever just stuck, and I don't believe in writer's block, but if I'm having like a really bad moment of writing, I'll go read a chapter of a book and just sort of get my head into this flow, and it's really, really inspirational.
Well, you have your first novel or your first mystery, Are You Sarah, on the bestsellers list. Now you've been successful with the mystery genre. Are you going to stick with that? Do you have another book in mind, or are you working on one?
I have at least one more coming, a couple of years away, but I'm working on it right now. Well, not right now, maybe later today. And it's also a psychological thriller, and it's still early days, but I also got the idea when I was on vacation. So we'll see what happens with that one.
Okay. And Lisa, how about you? You've written and published a book a year.
Yes.
What are you working on for next year?
I'm always a year ahead. So the book that we'll publish next year is already done. At least the first draft is done, but I'm not ready to talk about it yet. I never talk about it until it's bound like this in the
Right.
Galley edition, because I feel like, I don't know, like I almost can't talk about it because I'm not 100% sure what it's about yet, even though I've written it.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I get through the editorial process, I'll have a better understanding of what it is that I've written and what I want to say about it. So stay tuned. How's that?
Okay, well, I want to thank you both. This has been great to meet you both, and your books are terrific. So thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Lynn. This has been amazing. So fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, really great to meet you. Big fan over here.
S.C. Lalli is the author of Are You Sarah? Is published by Harper Avenue. Lisa Unger is the author of Secluded Cabin Sleep 6 and is published by Park Row Books. Thanks to our audience online and in the library. And thanks to Liz Zylstra and Aaron Nash of the Prince Edward County Public Library, and to the original founders of the Women Killing It Crime Writers Festival, Vicki Delaney and Janet Callow. And the books, Are You Sarah and Secluded Cabin Sleep 6, are available at the library or at the best independent bookstore in the country, Books and Company on Main Street in Picton. And you could also order online, pictonbookstore.com. I'm Lynn Pickering. Now I'm inviting you to curl up with a good book and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.